Prenuptial agreements. Hey, we've talked about them on video blog previously. Basically, agreement entered by two people getting married before they get married, in which they agree prior to their marriage how property, how child custody, how raising children will all be decided in the event of a divorce or in the event, unfortunately, one of the parties dies. But what happens if one of them says, hey, there were lies that took place in making that prenuptial agreement and therefore it should not be enforced? Well, that takes us to this week's case. Involved two people in New York, in the state of New York. They entered a prenuptial agreement. After they had lived together as husband and wife for a period of time, well, unfortunately, they did get a divorce. And the wife, soon to be ex-wife, jumped up and said, prenuptial agreement does not apply because he lied to me. He lied to me when the prenuptial agreement was made, and he said that it would not apply if there were children. Well, children came along, and therefore the prenuptial agreement should not apply. But in the prenuptial agreement, that was a written agreement, there was no mention that the agreement would be void in the event of children. It was only her word. She alone testified that, in fact, that had been the representation. Well, case went to court, was heard by a judge, and there the judge believed her, said, I find her to be credible. I find that in this instance that she is telling the truth. I find that he isn't quite as credible, and therefore I believe her, and I find the prenuptial agreement is void. Does not apply, and in this instance, their assets must be divided pursuant to marital property laws here in New York without consideration of the prenuptial agreement. Okay, well, there was a lot of money at stake. The case went up on appeal, and at appeal, the court looked at it and said, you know, when you have a prenuptial agreement that is written, that has been very deliberately put together by the parties, where there appears to have been full disclosure, well, the presumption is that that prenuptial agreement is going to be upheld, because you don't go to all that effort without wanting to be bound to that prenuptial agreement. But in this instance, we have a court, the finder of fact, that said this woman was telling the truth. She was telling the truth, and that he, husband, lied to her, inducing her to sign the prenuptial agreement by saying it would not apply if children came into their lives. So what are we going to do here? Well, what the court did is something that many appellate courts do. They deferred to and gave complete deference to the trial court. And generally, that is what happens. An appellate court will look at the judge who sat there, actually had the ability to look at somebody eyeball to eyeball and be able to determine whether she was telling the truth or he was lying. And in this instance, that's exactly what the court did. They said, yes, while there's a presumption of validity, there are those circumstances in which a prenuptial agreement will be held invalid. If there is fraud, if there's duress, if there is some other circumstances here that would normally violate, essentially bring an end, void a contract, well, if they exist, then the prenuptial agreement, just like any other contract, can be found void. And here we find there was fraud in the inducement, and therefore we find this prenuptial agreement is out of here. And they found in favor of this soon-to-be ex-wife and found that the prenuptial agreement didn't exist, and accordingly she could bring claim under the marital laws of the state of New York. Okay, so what do we learn from this? What do we learn from this? Well, we learned some more about prenuptial agreements, in fact that they can be voided if the facts support that. We also learned that on appeal, most appellate courts will in fact give deference to the trial court. Since the trial court was there, trial court could eyeball the witnesses, and the trial court was best able to determine who was telling the truth. Okay, bringing this case as we bring cases every week so you understand how the law works. I'm David Allen.